All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Bob the Father. Yeah, we had a little hiatus last 2 weeks, so welcome back. Again, this is open forum to any questions anyone may have, whether it be matters of faith, whether it be matters of practicality, personal. So let's open up the floor. Anyone have any questions?
No, I usually like listening and learning. I always learn when I keep my ears open and just listen. I love it.
Okay. Um, I have a question for clarification on when you're consecrating the Eucharist and you keep your fingers together.
Yeah.
What's the rubric for that?
Okay. There isn't one. So,
all right. That explains things.
but in the extraordinary form. So what they call those is sacred digits, right? So in other words, after you consecrate the Eucharist, the idea is that you keep your fingers pressed so that you don't touch any other object, right? Because the concern there is, practically speaking, is crumbs. Mm-hmm. So some affectionately or maybe detrimentally call this crumb theology. But this comes from Thomas Aquinas, was accepted by the Council of Trent, that we do believe that every particle of the Eucharist, every drop of the blood, every little fragment of the body contains the fullness of Jesus Christ, right? So if a crumb were to fall on the floor, that would be a sacrilege, provided it was done willfully, not accidentally, right? Or there weren't proper precautions put in place to make sure that didn't happen. That's also why you see some places where when they distribute the Eucharist, they'll use what they call a paten. So like a flat metal thing you put under, as people distribute, under your chin or under your hands, to make sure that the host, if anything falls, it falls on the paten, not on the floor. Right? Actually, I think presentation has patens over there, so maybe we can bring that over here. We'll figure that out. So that's the idea, is that when the priest consecrates the host, he's using sacred digits so that he doesn't touch anything else until these hands are purified again. Right. Usually a priest is very particular about that. You'll notice sometimes what I'll do is I'll put my fingers on the corporal, because that's perfectly fine too. Or maybe I just might use a purificator to, every time I consume the host or the chalice, I will take the purificator and sprinkle it over the chalice to make sure it's all contained. Mm-hmm. Right. That's also the reason why many people might receive on the tongue rather than the hand. Like we just got done training our second graders who received their first Holy Communion this weekend at 11 o'clock Mass. And we're talking about the proper ways to receive the Eucharist. So if you're going to receive in the hand, you make a throne, with your dominant hand on the bottom, your less dominant hand on the top, and then you use your fingers. Now, what I told them was, after I kind of learned this theology, what I would tend to do is not only did I switch to my tongue, but if I did receive my hand, I would always make sure I actually lick my fingertips to make sure I've consumed all the particles. Now, I said you can do that too, but just don't shake hands afterwards, right? Make sure you proper cleanliness. But also, that's also why a lot of people do receive just on the tongue, because you don't want crumbs on your hands, right? Because then what do you do? That's also why we also tell our Eucharistic ministers that first off, not to bless, right? Not to use their hands for anything like that. But also, you'll see in some places, maybe some of the ministers might put their hands on the person's head, the kid's head. And not only is that just like not liturgically proper, it's also a problem because where do those crumbs go now? Now they're in Susie's hair. Then what, right? So again, it's about the proper care for the Blessed Sacrament, right? So again, I'm not going to judge anyone for not doing those things. So if people come up the hand, receiving the hand, fine. If someone receiving the tongue, fine. We had one young lady who was asking if she could kneel, and I was like, yeah, great, wonderful. I'm not going to kick you out of line for kneeling or genuflecting before the Street of the Eucharist. That's a beautiful thing. It's a great act of reverence. And I think for this particular individual, it was a family tradition. So great, do it. So yeah, that's really the purpose of that. There's nothing in so there was a rubric in the pre-Vatican II Missal that did require that. So actually the priest after consecration would always do this, right? Mm-hmm. So it was hands up, put that way. The Novus Ordo Missal, the germ does not specify. So I may not do this, but I will definitely make sure that my hands are cupped and faced up so I don't, after I don't, and also make sure I don't touch anything else after I consecrate, right? Anything else, especially, it's not sacred, because you want to maintain that reverence. But yeah, most priests I think would take the same tact. I would hope. Some maybe not, but there's nothing specific in the germ about that though, right? Today, yeah.
Interesting.
So after you distribute communion, you go back and wash your hands, right? Or dip
We
your
purify the
fingers.
vessels. So there's two ways you can do
Well,
it.
there
You
used to
can,
be something by the
yeah, they call it an
tabernacle.
ablution dish.
Uh-huh.
So now, as far as I know, they haven't had one here at St. Anne's since I've been here, and even Presentation doesn't have one. So what I tend to do in those instances, I'll just purify the vessels and have the server pour the water over my fingertips, right, to make sure it's purified. Yeah.
So should something like that apply to the Eucharistic ministers then too?
That is a very good question. I guess I would tell Eucharistic ministers take proper, judgment on that. I mean, typically you can also feel if there are crumbs anyway.
Yeah.
Sometimes, how the question is like how deep do you get it at the individual cell level. Well, I mean, biologically, so yeah, even the cells would have Jesus fully. Should a minister take proper care, like maybe again, like their fingertips or something, and then maybe put some Perel on that afterwards? Maybe that might be proper, right? You also notice too that, like, especially in like high masses, more solemn masses, especially prelates will have their fingers purified after the Eucharist, right? As not only a sign of reverence to the prelate, but also make sure, properly speaking, Jesus is properly reposed. Yeah, I think that's probably a good tact. I don't know how many of our ministers really think about that too much, but that's one thing we do cover in our training, is just let them know, hey, those particles, you got to watch out for that too. So, yeah.
On how you do it too.
Right.
So I forget what year or century it was when my first communion, but I think way back then was when it first started to become, or at least maybe that was just where I used to live, south side of Chicago, where you got the choice. Other than that, it was always on the tongue. You weren't consecrated to be able to touch the host.
Yeah, and that's actually the reason. So when ordination, the reason that a priest's hands are consecrated is they're set apart to do that, right? Now, in the extraordinary form, the Mass prior to 1970, the Tridentine Mass, which is funny, we're celebrating St. Pius V today, who was the one that actually implemented the Tridentine Mass. So
awesome.
Usually what you would note, every church would have a communion rail, right? So basically there would be a divider between the sacred sanctuary and the nave. And so to come up to receive the Eucharist, you would come kneel at the communion rail, and there typically would be a cloth that would fold over it.
That's right.
You would put your hands underneath it, and you would just receive on the tongue. For that reason, that only clergy, had hands consecrated to actually perform that ministry. The theology has been developed to think that, well, no, the priest's hands are consecrated not to distribute communion, but to bring about communion, right? So in other words, the hands of the priest are consecrated to actually have the capacity to perform that action of consecration. But I think that still, an extension of that would be, well, doesn't that also mean distribution? Because the ordinary minister is the ordinary minister for a reason, right? The ordinary minister is that in ordinary terms, in ordinary means, the minister would be sufficient, the one minister would be sufficient to do that. What happened after Vatican II was not only do we have now lay ministers who are becoming involved, but even that was sort of when I train Eucharistic ministers, the first thing I tell them is that your ministry is not necessary. And I say that because it's more so about what the purpose of the Mass is. That a Mass is not purely activism. In other words, the role of people in the Mass is not just to minister in the Mass. The role of the people in the Mass is to participate actively in their thoughts, hearts, actions, words, right? That's how you minister at the Mass, is I'm performing my priestly duty as a baptized Christian in the Mass by offering my spiritual sacrifice, receiving what the Lord has given me, and that's my role, that's my ministry. Now, if it's called for, which in extraordinary mean, for extraordinary circumstances, meaning, hey, you know what? We have 50,000 people here, and I'm only one guy. So since we don't want to distribute communion all day, maybe we could have some people to help with that, right? And that's also provided you don't have other ordinary ministers available, right? So, okay, in those circumstances, because, around Vatican II, the churches were pretty packed. And Mass may have been a little bit longer because distribution community took a little while. And to unburden, in a pastoral sense, the people of God, it was determined that in those extraordinary circumstances, we could have lay people come to distribute the Eucharist. They should be properly trained and deputized, right, by the pastor to do so. And that ministry would also be universal. So in other words, if you're trained here at St. Anne's extraordinary minister, that means you would be extraordinary minister anywhere in the archdiocese. Right? I think what happened is that it was taken to the extreme. So in a probably well-intended actions, pastors tended to just like go hog wild and say, everyone, great, everyone wants to be a minister, come on up and we'll have you do it, right? Because we want you to participate and be part of this Mass in a deeper way that's good for you. And the problem with that is that not only do you kind of maybe take away the aspect of this active participation of soul, mind, and action, but then you have someone who so maybe becomes prideful in that, right? So in other words, like, well, hey, I'm an extraordinary minister, and I get to bring communion to the sick, and I get to distribute communion to the people of God, and you don't. I think that happens. Not often, but I think sometimes that does happen. Or there's such a connection with the identity of the extraordinary minister that takes precedent over the actual priestly ministry of the individual, right? So in other words, I'm thinking altar Mass, I'm going to be able to get up there and, okay, what do I got to do next? Or it's distracting, right? So that's why I tell my ministers, like, if this becomes distracting for you, or this becomes a point where of maybe pride, or if this is taken away from what you're receiving at the Mass, don't do it. Don't do it. Right?
Yeah.
But also, too, in the hand, that was also kind of a thought that was the most ancient form of receiving the Eucharist, right? Because in the early church, there wouldn't have been this probably, reception of the tongue because, well, the apostles received in the hand, they passed the loaf, broke it, and, so why wouldn't the people of God? But I think the argument there would be too is like, well, yeah, but you know what? They were just made priests, right? They were just consecrated for that action. So maybe in that respect they could, where no one else was there to do that, right? But even the early Masses, they would still probably have done the same thing, broke the bread and distributed it by hand, right? So, okay, so in the early church that was the case, so fine, right? Would there be that same reverence and understanding that every crumb was Jesus? I would imagine so. And so there's probably consuming reverently meant you receive every crumb, right? Make sure there's nothing left, that kind of thing. Purifying vessels would have been done as well, because that actually is an ancient Jewish ritual, right? So yeah, of course they would have done all that. Today, I don't know, like one thing we were talking about the kids, getting their first communion, like some kids were asking, like, what do I do in line? I was like, well, yeah, that's a good point, because, they're going to come individually on Saturday, on Sunday. So it's, there's not like going to be this like, get in line and follow the person in front of you. So they're like, what do we do from those? I was like, it was very stupid, like, good, okay, right. I was like, well, yeah, we're getting in line to receive our Lord. This is not just like the line at the movies or at Six Flags, you get on the roller coaster. So we want to be reverent in that, right? So if we want to fold our hands or put our hands across our chest or whatever when we come up, that's a good practice, right? We don't swing our arms and jolling up. We're going up to receive something
Focus,
very profound, right? Yeah,
focus.
And so I think they understood that, which was beautiful. So yeah, I don't know. It's these, some would say innovations. I think others would say these are going back to the most ancient traditions. And I can say either way, if the church says it's okay, then it's okay. But I also think too that in some of these things, the people, the pastors, those responsible for souls, I think it takes to some extreme, and maybe well-intended. Like, hey, we want you to be more participative, so we're going to let you do these stuff. Great. I mean, in some ways, we have some discussions in our fraternity group about this. Like, when it comes to lectors, lectors also are extraordinary ministers, right? that the purpose of the lector is to do that if there's no other clergy to read. So you could make the argument if, let's say, we have a mass with, let's say, 3 priests and a deacon. Hey, you know what? We don't need lectors. We got them. We're good. You know, but still, it's kind of an interesting discussion that comes to these things.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question.
You gonna go?
Sure. Okay.
We just came ready.
Great. Good.
Awesome.
History or significance. Back when I was in grade school, whenever we went to mass, all the women had to have something on their head, be it a Kleenex with a bobby
Right.
pin,
Veils. Yeah.
bells.
Yeah.
And now you still see some women with the long veils. So what is that? A sign, symbol, history?
Yeah. Good.
Significance?
So I think in the roots of our Catholicism, we find the Jewish faith, right? And so a person that will go to the temple or go to synagogue because they're in the presence of God, whether it be in word or in sacrifice or in the Holy of Holies, there's always been this tradition that you would cover your head, right? Now that goes back really to kind of Moses, because when Moses would enter the Holy of Holies, his face would start to glow, and it became distracting. So it was said that he would wear a veil because he wanted to not blind people by his holiness, but also like humility, right? So really pointing towards the glow of God, right? And ever since that practice, when the temple was established, it was always, or when anyone entered the Holy of Holies, you would always wear a head covering, whether you were a man or a woman. That was a common thing.
And they still do that in Rome too.
They're right, yeah, right.
If you go over there and go in, you have to.
Yeah, yes, you have to wear a veil at the mass and the Roman churches. So that practice became kind of extended into the Catholic faith, and that women and men, because now you're not only just in the Holy of Holies, you're in the presence of Jesus himself and receiving him in your very being, even more so that people should veil. Now, another aspect of that also was modesty, right? So it was often thought that a woman's hair, right, was kind of the epitome of their beauty or whatever, right? So in order to actually like kind of save that for their betrothed, that would be something that we veiled to maintain modesty, especially in the holiest place that you would be in, right? I think over time became more of a social norm, right? And so you tend to have an aspect of, well, why do men take off their hats? Well, that's more of a societal norm. I mean, if you really go back to if you want to go really in depth, that's one of the reasons why bishops wear zucchettos, that any clergy actually can wear a skull cap or zucchetto. Now, the color would indicate what rank you are. So, like, a priest or deacon would wear a black one, whereas a bishop would wear purple, cardinal red, and of course the Holy Father wore white. But that was also a sign of respect, and that kind of harkening back to that aspect of, humility, right? But also, what you also notice too is that the bishop would take off the zucchetto before the Eucharistic prayer, right? Because in that moment he's the person of Jesus, right? And so Jesus doesn't need a veil, right? So here you go, right? But also there's kind of this thought, well, should men also do the same, right? Who aren't Jesus? Maybe. I think though over time it's become more of a societal thing to say, well, men should remove any head coverings in church as a sign of respect. I think that's more of a modern take. In reality, if a guy comes in wearing a ball cap, I may ask them to take it off. But if they're coming in wearing like some kind of like hood or veil, as a sign of reverence, well, part of that thing has to be a discussion. And the other thing is you don't want to like kind of promote scandal, right? Because some people want to be scandalized by a man wearing a head covering that's not a clergy in church, right? Whereas women get away with that, right? I mean, if a woman came in wearing a ball cap, it's like, well, hey, that's kind of, it's loud. You're trying to be modest. So good.
Double standard.
Yeah, in kind of a way it
Right.
is, but yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, but again, I think these today are just more societal things rather than they actually are like tradition of the church and like dictates of the church. Because there is nothing saying that even a man or woman can or can't wear a head covering at mass. But I mean, also too, like usually those veils are rather they're some kind of ornate, right? Or sometimes they're a little more subdued, so it kind of express that aspect of humility or
Lacy
modesty.
or-
Yeah, more
There's a-
feminine.
There's a church down on South Grand.
Oh, Gravois.
South
I
Grand.
think
Yeah, Grand.
for Francis Sales.
That's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
if a woman went into Francis Sales or the oratory without veils, they'd probably be ostracized by the community.
Wow.
Because that's more so common in the extraordinary form than it is in the Novus Ordo.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if there's a rubric on that or not, but there might be. And so that's one of those things where it's like, now if you're like an outsider, you're not like a regular attendee, they might be a little more lenient on you.
Right.
But I think if you're like a regular goer,
Bring
you
you
show
a
with a
veil.
veil,
Put that
you
Kleenex
could,
out.
you could say like,
Get your
well, maybe I
Kleenex.
forgot, I'm sorry, whatever. But I mean, they might get on you a little bit.
They might bring you a veil.
They might point it out. Oh no, she was veiled. Yeah. I don't know for sure. I mean, I don't want to ostracize anybody too, because the people who go to those masses are very good people. They're younger typically, right?
Right.
They're big families. Oh, my phone. So I mean, it's that's their preference, and so good. They're trying to raise their children in that preference too. Good. I'm not going to say anything else otherwise.
A lot of people over at St. Elizabeth too that wear the veils and the kneel at communion. Lots.
Humility is good.
Lots.
Well, part of that too, I think, is that's also influenced by the pastor,
I know.
right? And so if you have a pastor that is kind of a champion of those things, then you're going to start seeing it happening.
I wouldn't mind kneeling, but I just can't get up and down.
Yeah, I mean, also the thing is too, it's hard here because we don't really have a community around here.
Right.
And
I think Father Phoebe has put like one of those standing kneelers out if you want to. You know, like the
On the side of him.
okay, all right.
over in St.
St.
Peter.
Peter, okay.
So
St. Peter,
that's.
they have a community rail, don't they? They don't.
I think they might have taken it out at the
Really?
I don't think they have a community.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I thought they did.
I mean, I don't think so.
Okay, all right.
But he just has one of those like where you kneel individually.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We do that over at the Newman Center
Mhm.
because a lot of the kids like the kneelers. So
Yeah.
just bring out a kneeler, put it down.
That's
I've had some people request that in that Our Lady presentation. I was like, great. If you come kneel down, I'll bring Jesus over to you. I don't have a problem with that. You know.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, there's something to be said too. Like, I don't know. I think sometimes you have to also check yourself on that too, because are you doing that to draw attention to yourself, or are you actually doing it towards reference to Jesus?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's another kind of aspect that needs to be taken into consideration. I mean, I can't read someone's soul.
Right.
But you know, it's funny when everyone is coming up in line, and then all of a sudden you have someone who kind of like kneels down. It's like you. Again, I don't care, but also that could be an aspect of why you're doing that when no one else around you is. But cool, whatever. You know.
But when you see a whole family do it, you're just like, well, that's
Yeah,
what
yeah, that's
right.
right. Yeah,
You know?
exactly
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there's something that's funny when there's certain people I know that come up and do that way. And I know them, and it's just like, I know you are, and I know what you're doing. So okay. But if someone new comes up, just like, all right, let's see. Most of them are either seminarians or former seminarians, so it's like, yeah.
Struggled with the Good Friday.
Yeah, maybe that's something we can look at in the future, is put kneelers out. We gotta find them. I think the only kneeler we have over there right now is over next to the candles in the old baptistry.
You had one during Lent up there. Where was that one from?
They did?
Here.
I don't recall. I didn't put it out.
I don't think I drank that.
I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe next year we can do that. Oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. I don't recall, but I know we did for maybe a few, some, like maybe like, I know we did for our day chili mass that we had over at presentation.
No, I was here.
Okay, that's, I don't know.
I could have.
Someone did on their own, then that would, oh, that's here. Okay, right.
Well, I'll pray about presentation. You know, I knew that was going on. Like every time I drive by there, I'm like, that's a big, expensive, right? I own a home, and
Yeah.
anybody who has an apartment or anything, a home or anything, knows that it costs money.
Yeah, and I think right now the thing is the budget is kind of skewed because we don't know. There was a time where it's like they were separate and they're combined, and you know the fiscal year starts in July, and
Right.
so in July they were separate. In August we came together, but we didn't really even come together until like really October, and even then the funds are still kind of separated out in some way. So,
The budget was just a guess. It was
well,
not really an important thing.
it kind of is, but also too, it's like something to kind of shoot for, right? So I mean, obviously there's certain things. Let's say like tornado hits. Well, hey, our budget is out the window, right? So. But I mean, you know, you can't really plan for everything, but you try to plan for the best you can.
God is telling us something.
Right? Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
God
Yeah,
is
yeah,
telling us
yeah.
something.
So I mean, budgets are good in that they kind of give us a guideline and maybe something to shoot for. But there are other factors come into play that maybe you don't necessarily foresee. But yeah, I mean, I'm not really too worried about the finances at this point. I think once we'll have a better understanding next month, but also, you know, really the next year is really going to be the telltale sign. So we'll really have to see. You know, I know 6 months or even a year is not really something to really like kind of hang your hat on because things happen here. Like one of the things over in presentation, like I know that kind of skewed the numbers was we had a boiler put in and we did some tuck pointing. Now, I still don't know who authorized that because I didn't sign anything on that. As far as I know, Father Dolan didn't sign anything off on that. So I don't know if it was the Archdiocese kind of coming in saying, well, you know, to make this place more marketable so we can maybe look at selling it in the future, we're just going to authorize that. But that's great if you're going to use Archdiocese funds. But if you're going to use parish funds, that really should be authorized by someone in the parish. So I'm still figuring that out. No one has fessed up to it. No one has taken ownership of it. So it's like, okay, so Ghost did it. Who knows? I don't know. Whatever. But that was pretty. I mean, that's a significant expense that was going on over there that you imagine we wouldn't have. And because of that, there was also some maybe bigger than normal heating bills, especially in the January, February timeframe. So once that got figured out, we didn't really need the boiler anymore because the heat wasn't being turned off. But I imagine that will be more, you know, less significant next year, right? So there's a good chunk of change that will be coming out of the coffers of presentation that wouldn't necessarily be coming out next year. So if you're taking this year as sort of the model, well, there's a lot of things like so.
A skew.
Yeah. I mean, so I mean, the other thing too is I know we had record this year for like fish fries. We had a very good outcome for the dinner dance auction. So those are numbers that you would say, oh, hey, look, we made this. And it's like, yeah, but can we expect that every year? Maybe, right? They hope so, because as we're getting as becoming a bigger community, more people will be contributing, you would imagine, and so maybe that number grows. But also, I think it's prudent to say let's not put all our eggs in one basket. And if that happens this year, great. We can't necessarily say that's going to happen next year. And so we wouldn't really necessarily factor that into the budget because, well, that's more of an intangible number that has different factors that can produce it or not produce it.
Yeah, that's no different than if somebody gave a sizable donation, you wouldn't count on that
Right.
the following year.
Right.
Good point.
Right.
Good point.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's happened too this year. We had a very generous donation from a benefactor who, from the state of the benefactor who passed away. And so our numbers from St. Anne's side look very, very good this year because we got this great surplus. But
Can't count on it every
next
year.
year, I don't know.
Right.
So yeah,
I
right.
don't know who's going to die.
Right.
You don't hope for those things.
Right. I mean, another factor that's this is no real secret. I mean, there's also been, and this is another kind of factor thing that plays into it that also is, I don't know how beneficial or hurtful this is, but one thing in the school we have this recurring accounts receivable. So, of course, not every family pays everything, all their tuition every year. Now they may pay something, and they may make contributions over a period of time, but it wouldn't be the full amount year after year. And so we tend to keep those accounts open because if you're still contributing to them, we don't want to close them. Because not only does that send a message of like, well, what's the incentive to pay it if we're just going to, forgive the debt at the end of each year? But that's the one thing the Archdiocese prefers. So the Archdiocese would like to say, well, everyone should start with a zero balance coming the next year. And so if there's outstanding debt and you know you're not going to get it that year, you should just say you should still bad debt it and write it off. Okay. But then again, where the incentive is, well, we're just going to write your bad debt off every year, then why would I pay?
Yeah,
right?
it doesn't, you're not training. You're not
Right,
having training,
right. You're not giving the incentive to actually keep paying.
Yeah.
And so I think that also might be a factor in these budgetary things. And that's when I first got here to St. Anne, that was the thing that was brought to my attention that, let's put it this way, the our representative from Sheridan County from Vicariate told me flat out that at the end of this year, the school is going to be out of money and we're going to have very little money in the coffers. And I was like, okay, this is a third day on the job. And oh, by the way, I have to make a decision if we're going to close the school or put a feasibility plan out there. Oh, so not having any experience here at all, not knowing actually how everything works, new pastor, you're going to say, I'm going to make this call now. Great. So we're not going to close because, I have nothing to base that on. But it seems to me that if the school's been open for this long, it could be open for another year. Right. So great. Then as you say, so some time here, I kind of realize that some of these things the Archdiocese puts out, I think, and maybe rightly, they're taking a very, very conservative approach to things and trying to look at it from a more objective perspective, and that's fine. But also they have been wrong so far, on certain things. And so it's
yeah, because every parish is different.
right.
Mm-hmm.
I now have kind of realized that to approach this with a feasibility report was a mistake because I don't think there's any grounds or circumstances to actually say you're failing school and we need to make this call. Well, our enrollment's been going up every year, and part of that's just because we're in a school district that is not certified, which is helpful for us, but also raises some challenges. We're affordable comparatively, and we're still paying our bills. And we're not taking any money from the Archdiocese to do that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it's so what's the problem? Now, one thing I think we can grow in, and this is on my mind, I think we can do that, is Catholic identity. We have about 63% non-Catholic in the school, but I look at that more as an opportunity for evangelization, right? It is kind of funny. We've had a few conversions happen. One young man actually is going to make a profession of faith tomorrow before he receives his first communion and first reconciliation this weekend, which is amazing. I think there's other kids out there that would like to follow.
Plus, it's our area where we are.
Right. Now, one thing, and this maybe is heads up for everyone who may be watching, one practice I maintained in my former parish when it comes to RCA, I get a list of all the non-Catholic parishioners or non-Catholic associates, let's say, of the parish. So school families, spouses of Catholics, that kind of thing. And I call them. I just go through the list and I call them and I invite them to come to RCA in the fall. And the way I approach this is I don't say this is an obligation to become Catholic, but you're married to a Catholic or you're sending your child to a Catholic school. Maybe you want to learn about what they're learning so you can actually engage with them better, right? I think that's usually a winning formula. We might get nobody that comes from that. Or we might get 10. I don't know. We'll see.
But you won't get any if you don't try.
Right, exactly. And so that's my approach.
Yeah.
And so all I can do is invite you, and you can come, and you can come as much or as little as you like. And if at some point you think, well, maybe I'm being called to this Catholic church, great. Then we already have it worked in, so you can actually complete that. That does raise some challenges, though, sometimes, too, especially in irregular marriages. But those are nothing that can't be overcome. So, interesting stuff.
can be hard to understand sometimes.
Well, the marriage thing, I mean, I've studied canon law, and sometimes these scenarios also are very confusing. So, I mean, I primarily what it comes down to is, are you in a valid marriage or not? And validity, for validity of a marriage, there has to be three C's: capacity, consent, and circumstance. So, in other words, or sometimes say context, or some would even say forum, right? So, how you do it also matters. Where that comes into play would be as a baptized Catholic. So if you're baptized Catholic, even though you may have been baptized as an infant, you still have an obligation as a baptized Catholic to get married in the church, or to have that that forum, that context dispensed by a bishop. Now, to have that dispensed by a bishop is not that hard, because really what you need is a good reason. So let's say you're a baptized Catholic, maybe you haven't completed your initiation, but you meet a very good person who is of the, I don't know, Baptist faith, whatever. And this Baptist person has a very devout devotion to his faith. He goes to church every Sunday. Maybe he's even related to a minister or something, whatever. If they come to a priest and they say, Father, I'm going to marry this person. I want to marry this person, and he's not Catholic. He's very involved in his church, and he wants us to get married in his church. Great, cool. Let's write to Archbishop. They want to dispense from form for this reason. Good, valid marriage.
But you can also get married somewhere and have a Catholic priest witness it, right?
You can, and so that it can happen. So when we witness it, I mean attend. Yeah.
being the
Yeah.
Catholic side of things.
You could, but also in those circumstances, usually a Catholic priest isn't required. So
But
they
but
can
it's
be.
the component for the annulment.
Well, okay. So but if you get dispensed of canonical form, that's been dispensed, right? So what dispensation of canonical form basically says is, you're not getting married in the Catholic Church or being witnessed by a Catholic party. That's fine, because of the circumstance you're in.
But if you get married in another denomination and you have a Catholic priest present then when it comes time for an annulment, you need to get an annulment because the Catholic priest.
If you need annulment.
I mean, let's say you do. Let's say you do.
So if you're saying that, is it grounds to annul marriage? In the marriage where a Catholic minister was not present, but you've been dispensed of canonical form, that wouldn't be proper grounds. Now you can say, well, you know what? I was really kind of hoping that this person in my life would become, more engaged in their faith and even become Catholic, and they didn't. And that was just really problematic for us. That didn't cause the bond to form between us in a married life. Maybe, you can say deference to the faith, or what they call the Petrine privilege in that respect. That'd have to go to Rome, right? But just because a Catholic priest wasn't there, and you actually get proper dispensation, that would not be grounds for annulment.
But it would, if you didn't get the dispensation, but there was a Catholic priest present, that
would not matter.
Really?
Yeah, because let's look this way. Let's say I'm not a priest. I'm a regular Joe layperson. I am not really engaged in my faith. I'm a baptized Catholic, and I meet this wonderful girl who's atheist. She's not even Catholic, right? Or no, actually, we'll work on that. Okay. I meet a really good Lutheran girl.
Okay.
Who's really engaged in her faith, and she's Lutheran, and she's baptized, and she loves God, and is a faithful Lutheran. And I say, you know what, honey, you're such a great Lutheran. Let's just go to Lutheran church and get married over there. Cool.
Great. On
board. And you know what? I got a cousin who's a priest. I'll invite him. He may come, maybe not. We'll see what happens. He comes. Now, he's not there wearing his collar. He's not there representing the church. He's there to just be there for me,
Okay.
which that might be another big problem, but okay, fine. And he witnesses that marriage. Not valid. Invalid. Because I have not gotten the proper dispensation from canonical form to get married outside of the Catholic Church. Yeah. Yeah,
So
so the
that's a letter that it doesn't have to come from the bishop, it can come from a priest.
well, no, so
Has to
the
come
priest,
from-
yeah, the bishop has to dispense that, right? So I can't just say, yep, you're good. No, it has to be, let's write a letter to the archbishop. It's usually not a big deal. It really goes to the Metropolitan Tribunal.
But you have to have it written down.
You have to have a reason, a valid reason. So she's really involved with faith. Also, it might cause tension in our family because her family is really anti-Catholic, or maybe they're related to a minister and the minister really wants to do it. These are all valid reasons to get dispensed from canonical form, right?
So if you get dispensed from canonical form, it's a valid marriage.
Correct.
And then you do have to get an annulment if things go south.
Yes, but the annulment wouldn't be on the grounds of canonical form, be on the grounds of something else.
Right, correct.
Yes, right.
But
right,
you
right.
would have to seek
Yeah,
that
but if you were to try and get
it
married
would
to somebody
be a
else,
valid
yes.
marriage.
Yeah, because in the eyes of the church, that is a valid marriage. Right. Actually, well, I mean, it's just truly a valid marriage.
Okay.
The only time that would be the case, let's say, like I said, if I get that first scenario I gave, where it's like, no, we're good. Yeah, that would be grounds for lack of canonical form. And so if I met another woman who, let's say, is Catholic, it's like, oh, she's great. And, I was married before. Oh, really? Well, you're Catholic, right? Yeah. Where'd you get married? This Lutheran church. Oh, was the spouse Catholic? No. Did you get dispensed? No. Oh, done.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Like it never even happened.
Right, because you didn't follow the proper channels to get the proper dispensations to make it a valid marriage. That context was not present, and so therefore wasn't valid. Right. Guess why it gets very in the weeds, right? It can be somewhat complicated. It's like, well, wait a minute, so what you're telling me is, so basically the lesson here is if you're Catholic, get married in the Catholic Church.
That's
Right.
But if you're getting married to a non-Catholic, well, talk to a priest. That's all you really should do, right? And most people don't even think about it. Oh, let's go to the beach. Yeah, cool,
Right.
great, all right, fine. It's not valid. So okay, wonderful.
So
But it is valid if you get that.
If you get the dispensation, yes.
Yes.
if you get the dispensation and it's valid, are you opening your marriage up to more graces, or
Okay, say it again.
What's the
What do you
point
mean?
of getting it validated?
So
Yeah,
validation. What
Public
validation says is that this is a true marriage, and it can't be a sacramental marriage without being a true marriage, right? So the point of the sacrament, right, is I'm going to receive the sacramental grace of marriage, right?
Yes.
Well, in order to do that, I have to actually have it valid first,
Correct.
right?
So if you choose not to have
So if you have it valid, it's not
you're kind of-
sacramental.
you're
Yeah,
pushing off.
you're pushing
those-
out the grace. You're not
Yes.
open to the grace coming from that
It's illicit.
sacrament.
It's still
Right.
valid, but it's
Right.
illicit.
What are you talking about, Freud?
I said it's illicit.
Wait, what's
Still
illicit?
valid,
It's not
but
even-
No, it's not even valid.
Oh, okay.
No. If you're going off to the beach with Honey Bunny and you're not getting proper dispensation, you're Catholic. It's not even a valid marriage, let alone sacramental. It's just not valid.
Right.
Unless you get the dispensation, say, okay, then it's valid, and therefore it also be sacramental, provided you're baptized, which you would be, right? Now your spouse, that might be a different story. So because let's say I find a woman who's non-baptized, we fall in love, we even go to the Catholic Church, and we're getting married in the Catholic Church. And we have a priest that preps us, we do all the proper, everything necessary, and we get married. Valid for sure. Sacramental, well, it's sacramental for me, because I'm baptized. Not sacramental for her. Valid for her, not sacramental.
But don't they usually, do they do that?
Yeah, they call it disparity of cult. So again, it has to be dispensed by a bishop. So,
Of course.
and when
Gotta keep 'em busy.
yeah, right, yeah, the bishop's got nothing to do. You got nothing to make all these
That's
things,
it.
right? So,
Tell Bishop Rice.
so when you're filling out the forms on the back of the sheet, there actually is these different things like mixed marriage, the spirit with a disparity of cult. So if the person's not baptized, you would say, yep, they're not baptized. The Catholic Party is agreeing to try to raise the children Catholic come from this and also live their faith, right? That's one thing that's very interesting about that, is that the Catholic Party is saying, I'm going to try, which means the non-Catholic Party has to understand that, not necessarily agree to it. So I understand that his role is going to be to raise the children Catholic and try to do the best he can to instill faith. I don't want him to, but I understand it. Okay. Now that might cause problems down the road, at which point we get into the more like, yeah, you know, we didn't, we kind of fell apart because I'm Catholic and she's not. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Preference of the faith. Pauline privilege. Great. Congratulations.
Wow. Yeah. It's a tangled web.
Yeah, that's why, you know, canon lawyers, they do a lot of work because they got to know all this stuff. And that's why I would ever want to be a canon lawyer.
Yeah.
Or a bishop for that matter. So, yeah.
Not for the faint of heart.
It is certainly not. Certainly not. All right.
Cool.
Right.
Well, thanks.
Good one.
So next week is Friends, Food, and Faith. So that will be May 7th at 6:30. That is going. The topic of that discussion is going to be, why does the church engage in ecumenism? So do you guys know what ecumenism is?
No.
Great. Come next Tuesday, find out. All right. We'll see everyone later. God bless.
All right.